Masechet Sukkah Daf Yud Gimel. We're talking about sechach and various vegetables and things that grow. What is permitted to use as chach and what not. So we begin with, it's really going to be a whole list, a series of different cases. So we begin. Amar Rav Yehuda hane shushe ush vas re. Mesekechin behu. Licorice and wormwood. Here's pictures of these plants. The licorice plant and the wormwood plant. Rav Yehuda teaches us that, yes, you can use them as sechach. Now, why would you think not? They grow from the ground. So what would be the problem? Well, if it were edible, like carrots, you cannot use carrots as sechach because they're edible, and something that is food does receive tum'ah. So his chidush is that licorice, wormwood tastes very bad, and in his opinion, licorice also tastes bad. So for those who don't like the black licorice or ara, you have a source. Rav Yehuda agrees with you, at least not without a lot of processing. Wormwood was used for medications, but known to have a bad taste, and therefore, you might eat it as medicine, or normally it's not food, and therefore is not mekabel tuma. So you can use the leaves as sechach. That's Rav Yehuda. Abaye is going to be the hero of the next couple of statements. He says a lot of interesting things. Amar Abaye b'shushe mesakechin. I agree with you regarding licorice. Bish vasre lo mesakechin. But wormwood, I think you cannot use it as chach. Not because he likes eating wormwood, but for a different reason. My ta'ama. Kevan desare rechayu shavik lehu v'nafek. Because they smell really bad. So if you use the wormwood as chach, people are going to go into the schach. It's going to be the smell is going to be offensive, and they're going to want to leave. So therefore, Abaye says you're not allowed to use it. Sounds like this would be a problem midrabanan, right? I mean, if you did, and it'll be okay. But he's saying this is a bad idea. The sukkah should be a place that is pleasant to stay in. So that's good advice by Abaye. Amar Rav Chanan bar Rava, hane hizme vehige mesakechin behu. So thorns and shrubs. Here are pictures of them, and you have the official Roman names in case you want to go find them. So thorns and shrubs, well, these are not edible. So mesakechin behu, yes, you can use them for sechach. Abaye amar behizmi mesakechinan. I agree with you regarding the thorns, but behige la mesakechinan, but not with the shrubs. Why? My ta'ama kevan de natre tarpaihu shabek la venafek natre, that because their leaves fall onto the floor, therefore a person is going to be sitting there and leaves are falling into his soup and is going to get annoyed and is going to leave the sukkah. Therefore, do not make schach lechatechila out of something that the leaves fall when the wind blows. Good. So Abaye really, you see in both, wants to make sure that you make the sukkah as comfortable as possible. Amar Rav Gidel Amar Rav, Hai apikuta dedikla mesakechin behu. Offshoots from palm trees, you can use that. Afagav de agide eged bide shamayim lashime eged. So in other words, like a lulav, or even if it's spread out. So yes, you can use that. And even though you bind it together, you might want to bind the leaves together. That's fine because they're already bound from heaven. In other words, all these different leaves, they're bound at the bottom naturally. So since it's naturally bound by itself, if you add another binding, it's okay. Why would it be bad to add binding? We saw in the previous stuff that you're not allowed to use a bundle of things. It's called gezerat osar, because when you have bundles of things, you tend to put them on the roof for storage. And if you put them on the roof for storage and not for shade, then it's not good sechach. And therefore, you're not allowed to put anything that is bundled. However, palm trees are okay because they're already naturally bundled. They're already connected. Even though you might add another tie to them, nevertheless, since you're tying something that is already one, it's already tied, it's already one thing, that's not called a bundle and it's permitted. A similar law, Amar Rav Chisda, Amar Ravina bar Shela, Hani dokre dekane mesakechin behu, offshoots of reeds, same thing. You can use them. Afagav de agid ninhu eged v'de shamayim lo sheme eged. Even though they are bound together, that's they grow with a natural binding, so that's not called a bundle. Afagav dahadar agedo, and even if you add your own after that, yiged bechad lasheme eged. Tying something that is already only one is not considered a bundle. And so that was said by Rav Chisda in the name of Ravina Bar Shela, and we have a braita that supports Rav Chisda's opinion. Tanya namehachi kanim vedokranim mesakechin bahem. Kanim peshita, ema kanim shel dokranin mesakechin bahen. The Braita says that reeds and spades you can use. Now, of course, you could use reeds. Why would you even think not? So the answer is it was actually talking about offshoots of reeds that spread out, but they're connected, and that is permitted. Okay, good. Now, since we mentioned one thing, law from Rav Chisda in the name of Ravina Bar Shela, we're going to mention something else, even though it's actually about Maror on Pesach, not about Sukkot. But it's always nice. We saw a few times that we connected the different holidays for some laws. So, V'amar Rav Chisda Amar Ravina Bar Shela, Hane marir merarita de'agma adam yoseh bahen yedei chovato b'pesach. In order to eat maror, you have to have certain species are good for eating maror. And this maror of the marsh, the bitter herb of the marsh, you can use it to fulfill your mitzvah of maror on Pesach. Okay, so that's good to know. Now, question, metiveh. This question is going to come a little bit from left field. Ezov, Ezov, we use it in Ezov for 4 different halachot. 2 of them have to do with para aduma, one that you throw into para aduma when you're burning it, another one that you use to dip into the water of para aduma when you sprinkle it on the people. So this Ezov has to be a certain kind of Ezov that the Torah says, has to be just plain Ezov. No modifier. Velo ezob yavan. You can't use the Greek one. Velo ezob kaholi. Velo ezob midbari. Velo ezob romi. And not the one not the blue one, and not the desert one, and not the Roman one. Velo ezob sheyesh lo shem levai. And nothing that has an added adjective, an added modifier. Okay, why? Because the Torah said ezov, and if you add a modifier, that's considered a different species that you're adding. And so I didn't say a different species, it just said plain old Ezov, nothing else. So therefore, we're making comparison from Ezov to Maror. Torah says Maror, therefore you have to pick whatever lettuce is called just Maror. And if it's called Maror of something, like in this case, Meririta, the agma, marsh maror, then that's different than just plain maror. So you see, and adding a modifier changes the species, and that means you're not allowed to use it. So that's the question to Rav Chisda. We're going to have 2 answers. Amar Abaye, kol shenishtana shemo kodem matan Torah, ubata Torah v'ikpida aleh, v'yadua sheyesh lo shem levai. Lo nishtana shemayu kodem matan Torah kelal. Abba has a very interesting rule that you have to look at the language as it was at the time of Matan Torah. So if before Matan Torah there were already 2 different names, for example, there's lettuce and romaine lettuce, and people called romaine lettuce one thing, and they called lettuce a different kind of species. If you already had those 2 different names before Matan Torah, and the Torah comes and says lettuce, then you know it means not romaine lettuce. But these did not have different names beforehand. So if at the time of the Torah there was just one word, lettuce, and that included everything, and later on they added an adjective that one kind of lettuce is called romaine lettuce, so that's post-Torah. So therefore, what the Torah had in mind, any lettuce. This is really fascinating because in general, that in contract law and constitutional law, originalists say we have to interpret the Constitution as what the words meant at the time of its ratification. So they actually go get old dictionaries from 1776 and look up the words and say to bear arms. What does bear mean? It doesn't matter what it means. What do arms mean? Does it mean a rocket launcher? They didn't have those back then, right? So you have to see what the words meant back then. So you see, Abaye is an originalist, but it only matters what the words meant then. And so therefore, he's defending Rav Chisda, explaining that at the time of the Torah, there was one word, maror, and that includes all different types. Later on, there was a modifier added to say maror of the marsh, but that modifier did not exist at the time of the Torah. Therefore, the Torah had it in mind also included under the species of maror. Okay, super interesting. And Rava has another answer. Rava Amar Hane Merirta Stama Shemaihu Vahedekare Lehu Merarita de Agma Mishum de Mishtakach Beagma. Rava says this added name of the marsh is just explaining where to get it from. It's actually not actually part of the name. It's not the official name of the species and family and genus. But rather, this is the same as plain old maror. It's just telling you, oh, by the way, how to know where to find it? Go to the marsh and you'll find it there. It's not part of the name. Okay, good. So now we learned a good law about Pesach. And now we come back to Sukkot, and now Rav Chisda again. We saw a number of his statements. Amar Rav Chisda, Iged behad la sheme eged, shalosh sheme eged. We mentioned before that if you're only bundling one thing, in other words, if it's a thing, maybe even if it has different leaves, but they're all connected naturally, and you bundle it, that's fine, right? One item is not called a bundle. Everyone agrees that, on the other hand, three things, if you're buying three things together, then that is called a bundle. But how about two, right? Is two considered a bundle, or it's just a couple of things? So Shenayim machloket Rabbi Yosef Rabbanan. It's a machloket between these two Tanaim, and we learn it from a Mishnah, Ditanan, Misvat Ezov, Shelosha kelachim ubehen shelosha give olin. So this is Tanakama, that's Rabbanan, and they say the ezov that you use for para aduma has to have 3 stalks and 3 stems. So 3 stalks would be the bottom, and 3 stems would be the top with the part that will you'll dip into the water. So 3 altogether, right? 3 stalks attached to 3 stems. Not each, not 9, just 3 and 3. You have to make sure the tops are connected and the bottoms are connected. So you need 3. Good. And then that's considered a bundle. And earlier on in previous stuff, we learned that the azov has to be a bundle, just like on Pesach when Bnei Israel dipped the azov in the blood. That was a bundle. So to here has to be a bundle. Okay, so that's Tanakama. That's 3, which sounds like 2 would not be a bundle. Rabbi Yosef Omer, Misvat Ezob Shelosha Gib'olin, Usharav Shenayim, Begardumav Kol Shehu. Rabbi Yosef says, yes, I agree, it's a mitzvah for the best, right? The Chatachila, you should have 3. But let's say you had only 2 remaining, 1 fell off or whatever. Right now we're assuming even if you didn't have 3, just 2, that's okay. And also, this is not related to for us, but the stump could be of any size. If the top of it, the buds fell off and just have a little bit, as long as you have even just a little bit, enough to dip into the water and hold a couple of drops, that's all you need. Okay, so there you go. So we're assuming right now that Rabbanan would say 2 is not a bundle, and the Yosef would say 2 is a bundle, which means if you use it for sechach, according to Rabbanan, 2 is not a bundle, you could use it for sechach. Rabbi Yosef says 2 is considered a bundle, you can't use it for sechach, because then you may come to put things for storage. Okay, so kasaka de'atin, right now, the way we're learning the Mishnah, we're going to reverse this in a second. Since Rabbi Yosef said, if the remnants are 2, we're assuming that he started off with 2 also. And so you're allowed to start off with 2. When it says 3, that means that you should try. The best mitzvah is to use 3. If you didn't have 3 and only 2, it's okay. That's Tanakama. That was Rabbi Yosef. And since Rabbi Yosef, he's the one that says that you need 3 only for mitzvah min hamuvchad, only lechatechila. But if you had started with 2 and ended with 2, that's okay. That means 2 is considered a bundle. And that contrasts with Rabbanan. When Rabbanan say you need 3, it means you really need 3. Right? And so 2 would not be a bundle at all. So there you go. That's the source that the 2 being a bundle or not is a machloket between them. But now we're going to show that we have it reversed. Rabbi Yosef Omer, Ezov techilato shenayim usharav ehad pasul. If you had a hyssop branch with only 2 branches, and then you left over one fell off, no good. You have to start with 3. If 1 falls off, you only have 2, that's okay. But you see, you have to start with 3. So actually now we're going to reverse it and show that the Bio says the one that says 3 is a bundle, 2 is not a bundle. And so we change it out. Epuch Rabbi Yosef shelosha lakev Rabbanan shelosha lemisvah. So in fact, Rabbi Yosef is the one that says you need 3, 2 is not a bundle, and the Rabbanan are the one that say 3 is ideal for a mitzvah, but even 2 would be fine. So 2 is considered a bundle. So that's what we conclude with, and we bring a braita to support that. Vehatanya can always introduces a braita. Usually introduces a braita as a question, but sometimes it said benichuta. It's just giving a proof. In this case, it supports what we just said. This is Rabbanan. There's no Rabbi Yosef in this braita, and he says that it has to start off with 2 and end up with 1. That's okay, and it's only a problem if you only had 1 to begin with. So there you go. That is actually a proof that according to Rabbanan, 2 is considered a bundle. So according to that, if you just tie 2 things together, 2 bamboo sticks, that's not considered a bundle, and you could use that for sechach. The next line just clarifies something that is seems obvious. Shi'arav echad pasul, how much shi'arav echad kasher. There's a contradiction between the first half and second half of this. First, you said if you have leftover only 1, it's okay, and then you said it's pasul if you have just 1. So which one is it? So it's no good if you start with 1 and end with 1. It's no good. But if you start with 2 and 1 falls off, you only have 1. That's what it means. That's okay. Okay, let's pause for a question.
Rabbi, I'm just curious. The schach that we buy today is all tied up. Mm-hmm. Isn't that then considered a bundle?
Okay, good. That's the next thing. Excellent question. That's coming up in a minute.
What allowed? We have 3 wicks. Does that have anything to do with this?
No, it's a little different. That's because you want to have a flame, a torch.
Okay.
So yeah.
Would be a torch?
Is 3 is a torch? Is 2 a torch? 2 is enough. Yeah. Yes. Okay. 2 is enough. Okay. Good. Darash maremar. Hane isurayata de sura mesakechin behu afagab de agadan. So in the city of Sura, that's where Rav was at Rosh Yeshiva. If you remember that story about Rav, that his teacher wouldn't forgive him even 13 years in a row on Yom Kippur, right, when he was in Eretz Israel, and he saw in a dream that he's going to be at Rosh Yeshiva. He wanted him to go to Bavel. So Rav did. Rav went to Bavel, and he opened the yeshiva in Sura, very, very important place. And that became a capital of Jewish learning. Anyway, in Sura, they used to sell bundles, not to make it easy, not to make it easier to carry, but just to count. Like they wanted to sell 25 sticks at a time, and rather have to count it out each time, they tied it in a bundle. But that bundle was not meant to be permanent, right? It was just while they were selling them to have them as a count, but no one would leave it like that. So therefore, even though they are bundled, it's only for the count and not actually considered a bundle, and therefore you can use them for sechach. Okay, so that's good to know. If it's not a permanent bundle, it's permitted. Amar Rabbi Abba, Hane sirife de ur baneh, kevan shehutara rashe ma'adanim shela kesherin. So this is a hut made out of willow branches. Here's one picture, but we have a better picture here. So it's a hut. Imagine that there are leaves on this. Apparently this was used by hunters. This is like a little tent, a little hut that blends in, a camouflage, and you can hide in there while you're waiting for your prey to come. And so it's bound on top like a teepee, and on the bottom it's woven. All the sticks are woven. So that's what we're talking about. So this is, if you leave it like this, that's definitely a bundle. You cannot use it as chach. However, he says if you untie the top of it, then it's kosher. You can use it as sechach. So now our question is, wait a second, they're tied at the bottom. I mean, they're not tied all at once, but they're woven together. So we have 2 answers. Amar Papa de we're talking about that you undid the bottom also. You undid the top and undid the bottom, even though they were once all together, now it's okay. Well, that seems obvious. If you take it apart, it should be fine. So here's a second answer that gives us an important chidush. Halacha l'maaseh, ve'amar Rav Huna bered Rav Yoshua, Afilu tema de la sharerehu. You can even say it's okay if you didn't undo the weaving on the binding, the weaving on the bottom. Kol eged sheno asui leteltelo la sheme eged. Anything that is bound not for the purpose of carrying it, moving it, is not considered a binding. Now, usually you bind something together to make it easier to carry. You hold on to that rope that you bound it with, and then you can carry it. But if it's woven together, like in this case, right, if you would undo the top, then these, if you pick up one of the sticks or any of the weaving, the whole thing would flop all over the place. So this is not woven together for the purpose of carrying. It's woven together for the purpose that it will stay nicely when you lay it out. And so this is equivalent to what we usually buy as sechach. When you buy that mat that rolls up, there are many sticks. The sticks are independent from each other, but they're woven together with string, and they're even tied. Doesn't come apart. Nevertheless, if you pick up any of those strings or any part of it, the whole thing just opens up all over the place. So they're woven to stay together as a mat. That's not woven to move or to pick up. And so therefore, halacha lemase is in fact like Rav Huna b'nei Rabbi Yoshua. Shulchan Aruch says so, and that this is the source that the mats that we use are kosher, even though they are sticks that are woven together. So that should answer your question. Okay. Amar Rabbi Abba Amar Shemu El Yerakot She'amru Chachamim Adam Yoseh Behen Yedei Chovato BaPesach. So now we're going back to Pesach and the Maror, but we're gonna compare Maror to Sukkah again. So any vegetables that the rabbi said you are allowed to use for Maror, which would mean things that look like lettuce, and so they have some surface area. Mivi'in et hatum'ah. So what other things can they be, what other laws would they be used for or not used for? So they can transfer tum'ah. In other words, you have a piece of lettuce, let's say a relatively large piece, and you had a bone that's the size of an olive from a human corpse under it, and also under it is a plum. So that even though the plum and the bone are not touching each other, if that piece of lettuce is on top, then that will create a tent, ohel, and anything under it will become tameh. So even though it's lettuce and it's food, yes, it transfers tumah. However, there's another law, which is that if I have a bone and a piece of lettuce over it, if I have a piece of wood over it, then the tumah will not transfer above that piece of wood. The wood blocks it, right? As long as there's some space over the bone, it usually blocks it. But the chidush here is that the lettuce does not block it, so it's substantial enough to make a ohel, to make things tameh, but not substantial enough because it withers away easily. Not substantial enough to block tuma from going up. So this is a bit of a contradiction. But that's the story here, at least according to this girsa. There are other girsot that have the opposite here. But anyway, poslin basuka mishum avir. You cannot use them for sechach because they're edible, they're food. So they are not good sechach. But there's another chidush. There's a difference between open space in your sukkah and sechach pasul. If you have a hole in your sechach, then that hole has to be less than 3 tefachim. Because less than 3 tefachim, we say lavud. It's as if it's filled in. We connect the whole thing together. So empty space is pretty chamur. If you have sechach pasul, like a piece of metal, then that piece of metal can be more than 3 tefachim. It can be even up to 4 tefachim, and that would still be okay. You shouldn't sit directly under it, but the rest of it, it can connect the rest of the parts together. So that's more mekel. So here's the chidush, that the lettuce, even though you think maybe it's like schach pasul, it's like a piece of metal, and so I could have even up to 4 tefachim. No, the lettuce is so inconsequential because it's going to dry up and wither away that it's considered like open air. So, if you're going to put lettuce on your sukkah, only put a little bit. So my ta'ama, kevan delechi yavshe parche v'nafle keman deletnehu dameh. Because when it dries and crumbles, it doesn't stay fresh long. It's going to fall. So it's as if it's already not there. Okay. So that's interesting, bringing together all those different halachot and comparing them. Amar Rabbi Abba, Amar Rav Huna. So Rabbi Abba is now saying another halacha, and now not in the name of Shemuel, but in the name of Shemuel's student, Rav Huna. Haboser lagat and lo yadot. Now I have to introduce another halacha, which is from Masechet Okasin. Masechet Okasin is considered one of the most least learned Masechtot. Even the Nasi, the Van Gamliel, didn't learn it and was almost embarrassed by that one day because someone wanted to ask him questions about Okasin, and so, but he got a tip off that someone was going to test him on it, and so he brushed up on his Okasin. So always good to know, be brushed up on your Okasin just in case you ever get a test on it. So Okasin is referring to handles or stems. Okay, so here's the basic halacha. Anything that's food can mekabel tuma when it gets wet. So let's say I have a banana. Okay, so banana can become tameh. Now the chidush here is that also its peel, because the peel of a banana protects the banana, and so it's even though you don't eat it, nevertheless, if something tameh touches the peel, then the edible part of the banana also becomes tameh, and vice versa. So that's peels. Okasin means handles or stems. If you have a fruit where the stem is important, you need the stem to hold the fruit. It's helpful as a holder. Then that stem also can become tameh. If that becomes tameh, so to the fruit, and vice versa. So let's give an example of grapes. Right, grapes on a vine. Well, grapes are hard to hold. You like to have the stem. It's beneficial to have the stem on it. Therefore, if a dead mouse or something comes and touches the stem, it'll make the grape also tameh. Okay, that's the general rule. Now, Rabbi Nashia gives an exception. Rabbi Nashia bar Gada amar Rav Huna. Remember his name because we're going to discuss this. Hakoser lasecha. Oh, I skipped a line. Sorry. Rabbi Abba. Sorry. We're starting with Rabbi Abba. Remember his name. Haboser lagat and lo yadot. If you take grapes and they're all on the vine, but you're not eating the grapes, but rather you're going to put them in the wine press, right, and step on them with your feet, like in I Love Lucy, then and lo yadot, the handles do not become tameh, are not part of it. Why? Because in that case, I don't want the stems there. I wish they weren't there. They're just going to make the grape juice worse. They're going to absorb some of the grape and get bad taste into it. So I really wish the vines weren't there. And they're not helpful to me to be handles. So therefore, the vines are just pieces of wood, not connected to the grape. If something tameh touches those vines that I intend for the wine press, the grape itself does not become tameh. So all has to do with your intention. Good. So that's Rabbi Abba's chidush. Rabbi Nashia bar Gada amar Rav Huna. Also in the name of Rav Huna, interesting. I guess Rav Huna said one thing. There seems to be two different traditions, two different understandings of what Rav Huna said. He said, "Hakoser lasechach en lo yadot." Someone harvests grain and he has in mind that he's going to use it for sechach. Also, the yadot, the stems are not considered anything. Here's the picture. Okay, right. So here's the yad. So I'm cutting the grain, and what do I want when I have the grain? I want the leafy part that's gonna be a lot. What I actually don't want is the kernel. The kernel is edible, so the kernel is actually no good for sechach. Therefore, you see, in this case, I actually only want the stem and any other leafy parts. And I would rather that the kernel weren't even there, right? Because the kernel is bad sechach. It's only permitted. In fact, we're going to see in a second if the leafy parts are the majority and the kernels are the minority. If the kernels are the majority, I can't even use it for sechach. So therefore, I do not want this as a handle for the fruit because I'm not using it to eat. I'm using it for sechach. And so therefore, if something tameh touches the stem, the rest of it, the grain inside, remains tahor. Okay, that's Rav Menashe's chidush. Okay, now we're going to compare these two things, both said in the name of Rav Huna. Man de'amar koser, kol sheken boser. The one who said koser, the second one is that you're going to use it for sechach, he would agree all the more so that if I'm going to use it for the wine press, then touching the stem does not make the rest of it tameh. Because in that case, for sure, he really doesn't want it to be there at all, the stem, because it makes the wine bad. It absorbs the wine and he has less wine. So he for sure doesn't want it, so they're disconnected. However, the other way around, Mandamar Bosed, the first statement of Rabbi Abba, he would say only in that case. He would say in the case of sechach, then yes, it is connected. You know why? Because actually he wants the grain to be there so that it will weigh it down, it'll give it some heft and it won't blow away. If you have just the chaff is known to blow away. So even though that is schach pasul, he likes it to be connected, and therefore one touching one will make the other tameh. Okay, now Ne'ema de Rab Menashia bar Gada Tanaehi. This statement of Rab Menashia bar Gada regarding the sechach, that they're disconnected, it seems to be actually a machloket Tanaim. And that's not always good, because you would rather that an Amorah can be compatible with all opinions of the Tanaim and not just with one. Okay, especially not if it's the Rabbanan. The Tanya, Sochet te'enim ubehen te'enim. If you have fig branches with figs on them, Parkilinu behen anavim, kashinu behen shibolim, mechabedot ubehem temarim. Or you have vines with grapes on them, or straw and grain on them. Palm branches with dates on them. The palm branches, by the way, are called mechabedot. That is also a word that means brooms. Why is the same word? Because they would use palm branches as brooms, right? It spreads out. They're very good to use, natural brooms. Okay, anyway, if you have all these things, kulam. If there's more of the waste, the leafy part, than the food part, then you can use it for sechach, because that's the majority, so it's fine. V'im lav pesula. But if there's more fruit than the leafy parts, then you cannot use it for sechach, because food cannot be used. That's the Tanakama or Rabbanan. Acherim omerim. Remember we saw this phrase, Acherim omerim? When we saw it, it only called Acherim. So here, Acherim, others, this sounds like they're both multiple groups of people. But one is still the Rabbanan, and Acherim say, Achu kashin merubin al hayadot ve'al. He's more machmir, and he says that the hard part, the hard part, meaning the leafy stuff, has to be more than not only the food, but also the handles of the food. So anything that's directly connected to the fruit, that is useful for holding the fruit, you add on to the fruit. And the rest of the plant has to be more than the fruit and the handle of the fruit. So you see here that according to Acherim, he considers the yadot as part of the fruit, and therefore touching one would make the other tameh. And the first opinion, the Rabbanan, consider the handles of the fruit to be together with the leafy parts, and not part of the fruit. So ma'ila behakami palge, the mor sabar yesh lo yadot, sounds like Acharim says we do have yadot, and that is what Rabbi Nashia said. Omor sabar en lo yadot, and Rabbanan would disagree with Rabbi Nashia and say they are not connected. So this is a bit of a trouble for Rabbi Nashia, that he's following Acherim and not Rabbanan. So we're going to try to save him. Rabbi Abba vadai tanaehi. Rabbi Abba, he was the first Tana that talks about wine press, and he would say in the case of a wine press, the vines meant for wine press, the vines do not join together with grapes. So according to him, for sure, yes, it's a machloket Tanaim, and he doesn't have any problem with that because he doesn't think that they should be. So he can agree with Rabbanan. So Rabbi Abba is fine. The Rabbi Nashia bar Gada milema Tanai. But if we say that for Rabbi Menashia, and that would be Rabbi Menashia is agreeing with Acherim against Rabbanan, that's really problematic for him. So he can answer, Amar lecha Rab Menashia tekule al masabreha koser sechach and lo yadot. No, in fact, everybody agrees, both opinions of these Tanaim think that if you harvest something to use as sechach, then you don't count the handles that are attached to the fruit. the edible part. In this case, you know why there's a machloket? Because when he first harvested it, he says, I'm going to eat it. He harvested with having in mind to eat it. And then he changed his mind and said, you know what, I'm going to use it for sechach. So that's why there's a machloket. And Tanakama says it's okay. In other words, the fact that you changed your mind, so now the connection is gone. And the Achirim say, no, you have to have, once you had in mind that you're going to use it to eat, so then the stems are connected to the food, and because that's what you had in mind to begin with, and just because you changed your mind, that does not change the status of the things that you cut. And so that's it's a bit difficult to read that in. And actually, the next line is going to challenge that. But this challenge is going to go on for a few paragraphs. So we'll end here, but keep this this idea in mind, right? We're talking about a case where you cut it having in mind that you're going to eat it and only then change your mind. So next we're going to see when you change your mind, this is all very interesting halachot because the status of whether something becomes tameh or not depends on whether it's food or not, and whether it's food or not depends on what you have in mind, what you're going to use it for. And so when you've changed your mind, does that immediately change the definition and status of it, or do you have to do an action to undo the definition? That's what we'll see on the next part. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.